Hello, good afternoon here in the Eastern time zone. This is Kevin Doyle. I'm the Executive Director for Career Development at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, and working together with our Yale Center for Business and the Environment on today's webinar on clean energy industry trends, improving diversity and inclusion. We have four incredible panelists with us today to talk about how the clean energy industry is and is not being able to increase the diversity and inclusion of the full range of different kinds of people to make sure that we have a workforce in clean energy and an industry in clean energy that looks like the United States and the rest of the world that we are working to change the clean energy industry and make sure that in our efforts to make improvements against climate change, that clean energy is one of those tools that we have available to us. So next slide. So here's today's speakers. They're each going to be talking for about 10 to 12 minutes and showing some great slides and information. If you can go back.
All right.
We have Andrea Lukey, the President and Executive Director at the Solar Foundation. Kristen Graff, Executive Director of Women at Renewable Industries and Sustainable Energy. Tamika Jakes, Director at Workforce Development at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. And Maria Redmond, the Director of the Wisconsin Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy. Four incredible people, and let's get started with Andrea. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Andrea Lukey, and it's so good to talk with all of you. I'm calling from the comfort of my home today. I'm homeschooling my kid. I'm in my pajamas, so not in the power suit you see in this photo of me, but we're all here in the DMV area. We're in lockdown, as many of you are across the country. These are very unusual times, obviously. Seems that many of our efforts over the last few years to promote clean energy and climate change policies and our agenda around diversity and inclusion, a lot of that is on hold right now as we deal with the COVID-19 crisis. And that definitely is a jobs story. So on the workforce standpoint, in February, just last month, the unemployment rate was only 3.5%. They are anticipating an unemployment rate soaring to about 30% over the coming months. And we are also expecting the GDP to drop by about 50% as companies are taking austerity measures in order to avoid closure. So this is pretty serious for a lot of companies, a lot of people. I'm hopeful that things will turn around quickly and we'll get back to normal. But obviously this is not normal. It's difficult to talk about jobs in the workforce when we have these macroeconomic things that are really creating a lot of pinch points and pressure. But with that, I'll get started. Kevin, if you could please advance my slides. So I run the Solar Foundation. We are a nonprofit. We are based in Washington, D.C. I've been there since 2010. I was their first employee, and I basically built it. And our mission is to increase and proliferate solar technology worldwide. We believe that solar has so many benefits and can be integrated into all aspects of our lives. We put out the jobs report. We are very active and vocal advocates on diversity and inclusion. We're very committed, I'm very committed personally to seeing a strong, qualified, and diverse solar workforce. And I use my platform, I use my position to be very loud and vocal about this issue. Next slide, please. So I think everybody knows this, so I won't go into too many details, but companies with diverse employees, they are more profitable, they are more competitive, and their employees are happier. And clean energy companies in particular, they benefit because a lot of companies are struggling to find qualified workers, and by expanding, casting a wider net, and really thinking about diversity and inclusion as part of your hiring strategy, you can tap into new and larger talent pools. It also helps to build highly qualified teams and attract top talent. People want to work at a place that is diverse and equitable and inclusive. And then, of course, in terms of workforce participation, the more we have people from all walks of life participating in our workforce, it's going to lead to more awareness around the benefits of clean energy, which will then inherently lead to more sales of clean energy technologies and more policy support. And really, to solve for climate change, we really need everybody's participation from a workforce standpoint, from a consumer standpoint. Next slide, please. So in terms of demographics, we study this as part of our National Solar Job Census. And right now, the current number of solar jobs that are out there in the U.S. is 250,000 solar workers. There are solar workers in all 50 states. This number is way up from 2010 when we first started tracking solar workers. We've experienced a 167% growth rate in just 9 short years. And if it weren't for this coronavirus crisis, solar companies would be expecting to grow in 2020 and so on and so forth, exponentially, really. In 2030, we were expecting about 600,000 solar workers. But the COVID-19 is definitely hampering plans. The industry told us that they were expecting about a 7.5% growth rate in 2020. I do not expect that to be the case, given what we're experiencing with the coronavirus. But one thing that we also study, in addition to the sheer numbers, is who has these jobs? Who are being employed by these thousands and thousands of solar companies, large, medium, and small solar companies across the country? And what we have found is that we are not, as Kevin said, as representative as the overall U.S. workforce, particularly as it pertains to women and African Americans. We have a lot of work to do with certain populations so that we can be more representative and stronger as an industry. Next slide, please. But this is not something that's inherent to the solar industry. There are similar challenges being faced by other industries like the utilities and construction and manufacturing. All of these sectors, and I think I would even go as far as to say telecommunications, IT, healthcare, all of these industries are struggling in some way or another. And so it's really important to shed light on the numbers so that we can start to make improvements. Next slide, please. And so that's what we do with our diversity. This is a supplemental report that we have issued about every other year. We are anticipating the release of our 3rd edition this fall, if we're able to. But that's the plan. And what we do is we survey companies, we survey people, and what we have found is that there are pretty big gender gaps as they pertain to wages. There are gaps, gender gaps as they pertain to career advancement and job satisfaction. Women make only 74 cents on the dollar compared to men. And those that are in senior leadership executive positions, only 20% are women. And go ahead, next slide, please. Thank you. Got a little bit lost in my slides. So I think I'm on slide 7. You're a little too far. We can go back one more. There we go. So, and what we also found is that improvements are being made. So 36% of companies formally track diversity, which is not a big number, but it's better than the last time we checked. And we found that more companies year over year have a strategy in place to increase representation of women and people of color. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. There we go. Okay, so in our report, we have a section that's dedicated to women of color who are faring the worst in terms of job satisfaction and job mobility. And what we learned through our research is that they feel as though they need to provide more evidence of competence. They feel they have difficulty making the right connections, and that they experience workplace microaggressions. When asked if they have some advice to give to their company or to the industry at large, very commonly they said that the solar industry is pretty nepotistic. It relies too heavily on word of mouth when hiring and promoting. And so that's a real area in which I think the solar industry and other industries that are feeling this imbalance can really look at and address head on. Next slide, please. And so in terms of moving forward, despite the economic slowdown, we do have to keep pushing. Those at the top, they need to be accountable and responsible, and they need to show leadership in this area. There's a lot of efforts that are framed at CEOs and leaders to help them, encourage them to make commitments to create goals for D&I hiring, and I think that's really critical. The companies, they really need to be assessing their procedures. They need to be looking at best practices and making sure that their hiring and recruitment procedures are non-discriminatory in all ways. They should be tracking internally demographics. They should be tracking internally employee satisfaction. It should be a safe place for people to communicate any experiences of microaggressions or problems. And the companies really need to take mentorship and networking opportunities seriously and provide opportunities for their staff to learn from each other, to get out more. Obviously, we're in a sort of social distancing era, but there's a lot that we can do via technology, and I think that it's really important to serve as a connector to others that can provide support and growth examples. Next slide, please. And so of the thousands and thousands and thousands of companies that are in the solar industry, right now, in my opinion, there are three real standouts. Sunrun, they recently achieved 100% pay parity among their employees, and that's a really outstanding achievement. McCarthy, they're a big construction company. They're constantly trying to hire 500 and 600 and 700 people for these massive utility scale projects that are out in the desert or out in the rural America. And so they've formed a lot of strategic partnerships to bring in more and more diverse candidates to these big projects. And I think that's a really notable best practice. And then the last one that I would mention here is Nextracker. They're very keen on creating networking opportunities for women to create mentorships so that people, women in particular, have examples for career mobility. And that's all I have time for today. Next slide, please. All of our research can be found on our website, of course, thesolarfoundation.org. Our jobs research, our diversity study. As I mentioned, we're planning on releasing our third edition this fall. I'm absolutely happy to answer any questions you may have today, and I'm also happy to connect with you offline. And with that, I will yield the floor, and I thank you, and I wish you all good health and safety. Thank you.
Andrea, thank you so much. That was fantastic. And I know there is so much more contained in those reports, which I look forward to every year. So thanks so much. You mentioned about questions, and let me ask everyone who's online to know that you can submit questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll be taking all the questions at the end when we're done with all four presenters. But we look forward to starting to get your questions. Please feel free to be sending them in. we'll be looking at them as the presenters are presenting, and at the end, we'll be taking the questions either in the order that they were received, or if it seems like several of them are kind of the same, we'll aggregate the question and give it to either the whole panel or to a specific speaker. So Kristen, take it away.
Sure. Thank you so much. Can you all hear me okay? I'll just dive in and hope you can, and you'll let me know if not. My name is, as Kevin had said earlier, I'm Kristen Graff. I'm the Executive Director of RISE, which is Women of Renewable Industries and Sustainable Energy. So you can hop to the first slide. I know we have the sense that most folks on this call really agree with this overall mission of having a more diverse workforce, but I think one thing that I've found to be really important is being able to make the case to other people who sort of get the sense that rhetorically it's a nice thing to do, but maybe haven't started to take it very seriously as a business objective yet. So I wanted to include a few slides at the beginning that I think have been an influential part of sort of shifting the conversation, both as part of the broader culture, but also for us specifically within the renewable energy industry over the last few years. So this first slide is particularly about the role of women in business. It's from a study put together by Catalyst, the nonprofit based in New York that works with the Fortune 500, and particularly focuses in this report on women as board of directors. And they compare the financial performance of companies that have no women on their board of directors. So those are the lighter blue bars on the left side, with companies that have 3 or more women on their board of directors. Those are the slightly darker blue bars on the right side. And the 3 different financial metrics that they're looking at across, starting on the left side, are return on sales, and then return on invested capital, and return on equity. So this has been sort of their consistent finding for years now, is that companies that have 3 or more women on their board of directors tend to outperform the companies that have no women at all. And you can see, at least on some of those metrics, it's outperformed pretty significantly. And I think the metric of understanding that getting to 3 or more women is actually really critical, because in part, that gets you past that sense of tokenization of any one person on the board. And so once you have 3 or more, you sort of break through this important barrier that allows people to bring their own self in a very different way than if you are just the single woman or the single woman of color on a board, and you feel sort of more sense of compulsion to acquiesce to the group or assimilate in the group setting or group culture. And that's kind of a really important piece of getting at the diversity of minds and talents and backgrounds that we want there. We need to make sure we're doing more than just tokenizing and getting a lot of diversity and a lot of variety, and really building a culture that accepts and values those diverse ideas and opinions, so that we know that we're getting everything we can into our business overall, and sort of for that broader purpose too. Next slide. So we also know through some research out of MIT, there's a group called the Center for Collective Intelligence that got started by working on the way we're crowdsourcing things all over the internet, really. This is how their work got started, but now they've been doing these studies for years about just generally how do groups make good decisions. And so far, they've only found 3 factors in their research that strongly correlate to better decision making. The first is the average social perceptiveness of the group. That's how well all the group members read each other's nonverbal cues. The second is the evenness of conversational participation. So whether or not the group is dominated by one person who talks all the time, or whether the group really does a good job of getting everybody to speak more often. And then the last is the proportion of women in the group. And as much as I would love to say that's because just women are really brilliant in all the decisions that they make, I think particularly in the US, and the researchers at the Center for Collective Intelligence would say this too, that we tend to train women from a very young age in the US in those first 2 categories, making sure they understand nonverbal cues, they read relationships better, and that they have an interest in making sure voices are heard more often. It's just part of the way we train, raise, sort of some key childhood development ideas that tend to show up in the way we raise our children in the US. And then next slide. I just also wanted to highlight a great study that I tend to reference a lot from McKinsey called Diversity Matters, that looks not only at gender, but also at racial diversity, and that as well to the financial performance of a business. And they're looking, that earlier Catalyst data was specifically about boards, but this research looks more at overarching teams as well as sort of an entire workforce. And so seeing that dramatic difference in terms of the companies that are in the upper quartile of gender diversity as well as the upper quartiles of racial diversity. And then next slide. I knew that Andrea, I often have in my deck here slides talking about the state of the energy industry as a whole and renewables. I knew Andrea was going to give you a lot of that information from the solar sector, and I'll let you know that the wind area, as another big portion of renewable energy, tends to follow a similar track around 25 to 30% women across the sector, and that falls heavily in sort of mid-career. But I also wanted to pull out this slide from Credit Suisse's research on boards across different industries. And so sort of relating back to that first slide about women on boards, we still have a long way to go in the energy sector. And while we've improved a lot over the last few years, we still have a long way to go. And unfortunately, we're still sort of falling in the bottom tier of most of these different industries in terms of getting women onto the boards of our companies. So just another piece of what I want us all to be thinking about. And so the next slide, this is why I'm here. This is the work that we're focused on doing. So RISE's mission is to promote the education, professional development, and advancement of women to achieve a strong, diversified workforce and support a robust renewable energy economy. We do that because we believe it's a fundamental key to the success of renewable energy and to tackling some of these great challenges of our time. And so having as many diverse ideas, minds, backgrounds, talents in the mix are so important. We're focused both on, we have kind of three core areas I usually talk about: recruiting more women into the renewable energy space, retaining and advancing all the amazing women that are already here, and then working on getting all of those women and the great men that are engaged in our work across our network out talking about not only how much they love their jobs and love renewable energy, but the importance of a diverse workforce overall. And jump to the next slide. So one of our key areas that we've been working on over the last few years is helping companies in the renewable energy space figure out where to start tackling their challenges on the diversity and inclusion work. And so this is what we call our institutional top 10. We have a recognition that companies across the industry have a lot of different areas to be working on. And for every company, there may not be a perfect sort of silver bullet track or easy this step, then this step, then this step to figuring this out. There's a lot of deep internal work and reflection that has to be done, and a sense of digging in on a company's corporate values and institutional culture. And so with that said, though, there are a lot of low-hanging fruit opportunities, and there are also a lot of ways to just get started somewhere. And so that's our sense with this 10. You can see different things on there: data, goals, which is kind of the leadership piece that Andrea was talking a bit about before, hiring and recruitment, pay and salary pieces, promotion reviews and feedback. I'm going to just highlight the one that you can see highlighted here for my talk today, but corporate culture, because I think it's sort of pervasive of a lot of the others. But I do want to highlight that data is so important, and I'm so thankful for Andrea's organization and their data collection, but each company as well needs to be doing some of their own data work to really understand where the bottlenecks are and what they need to focus on. But often for any of those bottlenecks, the root can be found in corporate culture. And that can be anything from addressing implicit and explicit bias, but also the way you're doing education, the way you're setting values. I sort of believe that diversity as a cultural concept, the way some companies will have a safety culture, right? They have a mission, especially sort of in a manufacturing or construction sector, right? safety is a core value of our company, and we are having it permeate all of our work. And it's not something that goes away. It's something, or not something that only one person gets to work on. You know, you might have a safety team that heads it up, but you know, the CEO cares about safety, everybody cares about safety, everybody knows all the steps around safety. And I think it's that sort of high level and detailed level that we need to address diversity in the workforce. So if you can jump to the next slide, I just wanted to highlight a couple of quick things. One is a resource I always send folks to called biasinterrupters.org. They have tons of incredible tools for actually implementing both in the hiring and recruitment process, but also in feedback and performance reviews, as well as in meetings. And they're constantly building more toolkits. And these are really like, how can you recognize across your company that bias exists, that we all have it no matter what, but that you're going to implement some specific structures that help to address it as much as possible in all of your processes. And I just have the GE logo up there because they did some incredible work with their Edison internship program that is kind of like a management track training that for ages was about 25% women every year coming in straight out of college, and they were just kind of always hitting this wall. And a few years ago, they decided to implement some very structured things, both about how they bring in their original slate, but conversations that they have within the hiring committee, conversations that they have to sort of more explicitly have metrics and quantifications throughout the interview process. And within a year, they were at 50% women coming into the program and have sustained that throughout. So I think that's just one small example of exciting things that are happening as people really get down to recognizing that we all have this, and we just need to be very intentional about it, what it looks like to address it. Jump to the next slide. I also just want to highlight that this, while we are all you know, Kevin is a wonderful voice on the call, but as speakers, we're all women today. I think it's really critical to make sure that we have as many diverse voices in this work and conversation as possible. And that means including men in the conversation. And so I think recognizing that addressing diversity can have benefits for everybody, and everybody needs to be a voice in the conversation is a really critical piece of that culture too. And you can jump to the next slide. And so just my personal key takeaways for you all is just remembering that the renewable energy workforce as a whole and our highest decision-making tables still lack women. We want more women, and particularly for us, we're focused on bringing in more women of color, and we are desperately needing them at all of the levels, from entry level through the C-suite, from all the sectors, finance, legal, manufacturing, everything. And that really everyone has a role to play and some piece of this work to be doing. So, and with that, I'll hand it over. Thanks.
Kristen, thank you so much. There's so much to think about. And I really think that both of you, Andrea and Kristen, have really helped sort of lay the groundwork of what's going on, some of the background, some of the things that are happening. And one of the states that I think has taken on board a lot of these ideas in the clean energy space over the last several years is the state of Massachusetts through the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. And we're really glad to have with us today, Tamika, we're so glad that you could join us. So why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much. Hello to everyone on the call. Same thing as some of the other presenters have said, I am also home in Massachusetts, where we have kind of hunkered down. As of noon today, pretty much everything is shut down. So thank you all for joining on the webinar today. I do appreciate it. As Kevin said, I am the Director of Workforce Development at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. And we have been in existence since 2008, created by the past Governor Patrick. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to go through a little bit about what our mission is. As you can see here, it's to grow the state's clean energy industry while helping to meet the Commonwealth's clean energy, climate, and economic development goals. And so through that, we have a lot of different departments at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. We invest in startups, we invest in infrastructure, and then as you can see, this is where I kind of come in play, is the connect, as you can see, connect employers, job seekers, students, communities, and investors to the clean energy industry. Excuse me. And so with that, we try to innovate. And so very proud to be the Director of Workforce Development since 2012. And just here are some of our initiatives that we are working here in Massachusetts. What we're working on offshore wind, energy storage, microgrids, and water innovation. That's just one of our many programs that we have. So next slide. So here you can see under workforce development, you can see the different buckets that we tend to use. We focus on the job seeker, as well as we focus on the employer, and then we focus on the education trainer, which is the K through 12 system, or trainers that are working with incumbent workers, or workers that have, different barriers to entry. So we work with a diverse group of educators, employers, and seekers as well. And so just to give you a little bit of review of what we're looking at here in Massachusetts, we also produce a clean energy report that comes out each year. And so these are the latest numbers from 2019. You can see the breakdown on the different races that we have surveyed in our workforce. So if you look at the clean energy jobs, Hispanic or Latinx, it's about 19,000 workers. African American or Black workers, it's a little bit over 8,000. Of Asian descent, a little bit over 1,000. And we also count 2 or more races. And then if you look at the women, 33,000, a little bit over 33,000. This is about 30% of our workforce here. And then we also break down veterans, workers over the age of 55, and then also our union members. So within this, on the second line, you can see the numbers that are represented here. And so with this, as you can see, we have 30% women in the workforce. And then if you look down the different races, you can see that this is something that we are constantly working on to make sure that we really are working with a diverse population, making them aware of this industry and the opportunities that are industry. The great thing about Massachusetts is that we have a great educational system, and the opportunities, no matter what part you come into, what timeline or point you come into the workforce, there is definitely an opportunity for you. And so I just want to focus on a few minutes on the Clean Energy Internship program that Massachusetts runs, because this is something that is part of my personal story of being with the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. So as I mentioned, I came in 2012, and we provide a paid clean energy internship program for college students. And when we first started this program in 2012, it incorporated 85 college students. And when you looked at the diversity of the program, it was just one summer long, and we were paying for those 85 students to be at a clean energy employer for 12 weeks. And so the program was a great success coming in. However, when you looked at the data of who received the internship, it was, of the 85 people that received the internship, college students that received it for that summer, it was 83 of them were white males from elite universities. And so we really had to come up with a plan so that we would have not just males involved in the program, but we would also have representation from state colleges, from community college, and that women and minorities would be part of this program. One thing in Massachusetts, if you're not aware, we do have many universities. We do have a lot of elite universities. And what happens, a lot of those university graduates have come out and they've started startup companies. And so within that, they have their own biases that, let's say if you graduated from a Northeastern, you only want to hire a Northeastern grad. And then, someone with a community college degree applies, and you think because they have a community college, degree that they don't have the talent and the skills that your company needs. And so this took a lot of thought for us, how can we educate our employers to let them know that, just because someone comes from a state college or a community college, it doesn't mean that they don't have the skills and the talent needed to be at your institution. So a way that we kind of implemented some policies was that you could have two interns from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center paid for 12 weeks. We do this 3 times per year, but the third student had to be a community college student. And so with that, it opened up the doors for many community college students and many students from state colleges to become part of these companies, because now the companies were understanding the program and they really wanted this talent that was subsidized by the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. And it helped us to bring our numbers up to, currently we have 42% of our participants in the program is women or minorities. And currently, last year, we did about 550 students that were part of our program that we paid clean energy internships for. And so again, 42% of those students were either women or minorities. So we definitely have worked our way and worked with our employers. We go to career fairs and we get to see the talent face to face to make sure that their resumes are being put in the database, and we just extend ourselves to them. How can we help you? How can we know about the industry? We make sure that we visit community colleges that are in urban locations. So we are very strategic in the things that we do and going to meet people so that they see a face. Next slide, please. And just here are some programs, some targeted workforce programs as you are thinking about clean energy and how to diversify your networks and your training programs or work with employers. Currently, we have a clean energy activity day that we go into the schools. We provide funds to each to each school that is kindergarten through 8th grade. The school does a day where we pay for the equipment for the students to play with. We pay for businesses to come out and speak. We pay for the prizes that are part of the day, and students are able to engage and do a hands-on activity around clean energy. So if you see in this picture here, you can see that on this particular day, the students are learning how to construct a wind turbine, and then they were able to go test them in front of fans to see if they were working properly. Moving down the bottom, we have 2 programs where our vocational schools, we allow them, if they are on co-op, and most of our vocational schools have high concentration of minority and women in their programs. So we allow students to also receive an internship when they're on their senior year of co-op. We reimburse the businesses to take on students as well. So we have 2 programs for high school. One is a Learn and Earn program that happens in the summertime, and we also have another one that happens during the whole year, which is our vocational internship program. And just to the right, I know my time is running out, but some successful programs that we've had. Again, building operations is another program that we are going to be developing in late 2020. Again, those programs will be geared to how can we diversify our workforce. So there'll be programs created around minority, women, low income individuals that are seeking to transition into the workforce, as well as other populations that have barriers to entry. And one of the programs that I saved to the right on the bottom was our Successful Women in Clean Energy program. That was a past program, and that's where our employers told us that they needed someone that could be able to sell the technologies, and they didn't necessarily need someone with a degree. So we were able to take women, train them in sales, as well as they received some community college credit. And then we paid for the women to go work in clean energy businesses for 6 months. And then from that, many of these women were hired by the business. So these are just some of the programs that Massachusetts is doing to make sure that diversity and inclusion is happening at our employers. A lot of times we are the seed funders, the seed starters on the workforce programs, and then the businesses will take over. So thank you just for listening to some of the way that we have done this in Massachusetts. My email is included on this slide, and thank you for listening.
Tamika, thanks. I couldn't help but notice in the data about comparing Massachusetts clean energy demographics to the overall, that in almost every category, the clean energy industry in Massachusetts is doing better than the overall. It seemed like women were a notable exception, but in many of the other cases, really well. And I'm sure it has a lot to do with the Mass CEC programs. So thank you.
Thank you.
And please keep the questions coming. They're really adding up in the Q&A section. So send along your questions for us and we'll take them at the very end. Let's move on to our next speaker. Maria, it's so good to have you. And let's find out about some of the things going on in Wisconsin. Take it away.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and a virtual hello to everyone from your homes. I hope that you're healthy and safe, and hopefully we'll be able to get out and about here soon. Fortunately, we have technology to move us through the world that we live in right now. So next slide. My presentation is not going to be very data heavy. What I wanted to talk about a bit was the policy that states are working on related to equity and inclusion in the workforce. And I thought it'd be helpful just to give a little personal perspective. I actually started out, I'm not going to tell you my whole life story, but I take you through a couple of years of it. I actually started out going to school to be a doctor. And I decided very quickly after being in school for a while that I no longer wanted to be a doctor. But I did continue through college and ended up getting a degree in psychology and moved into state service right away after college, and at the encouragement of a friend who was working for the governor at that time. And here I am 20 years later, recently appointed as the director of the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy. And I admit that I would not have thought that my career would have had led me to this point. But when you look at the energy sector and the staff that work in the energy sector, usually what I do when I'm in a crowd of people, I ask how many people have a degree in energy? And usually no one really raises their hand. I think maybe, a lot of universities and a lot of tech colleges are now coming up with certificates and, degrees in similar like renewable energy or something like that. But really the energy sector is multifaceted and there's opportunities for everyone based on your interests. And I've worked with folks who have degrees in political science, policy, engineers, environmental science, law, health, conservation, automotive technicians, researchers. So there's just a lot of opportunity, and we need to keep that in mind, that we really need to look at the growing opportunities in training and education and jobs for everyone, and look at their strengths and build on those, because that's how I got to where I am today, based on my ability to organize, my ability to lead, and so I think it's just building on all the strengths of the people and figuring out what fits for them and how they fit into the clean energy economy and the jobs. Next slide. One area I'd like to highlight is that leadership is really important, and my boss is the governor, lieutenant governor, and secretary of administration. And our lieutenant governor is the first African American to serve as a lieutenant governor in Wisconsin, and the second to ever hold statewide office. And the relationship between the governor and lieutenant governor in our state is pretty amazing. The governor has really empowered our lieutenant governor to take a lead role in energy and climate change. And this is something that is a platform for our lieutenant governor. And it's really awesome to be able to work closely with his office and with the governor's office on these efforts. And it's really also inspiring to a lot of people in the state, because it is really walking the walk and talking the talk on diversity, and making sure that our leadership is there to lead and show how it's done, and really looking at all of our programs in the state and figuring out how are we creating opportunities for the citizens in the state and being fair. And really, it doesn't matter what zip code you live in, that there's an opportunity in energy for you, or to address climate change, or however you feel you want to be involved in this industry, that there is an opportunity here for you. Next slide. One of the things that our governor came out with right away is pushing for equity and inclusion from the agencies. And the very first executive order out the gate was to prohibit discrimination in state employment, public services, and contracting, to ensure that we're opening up opportunities to work with state as much as possible, either working in the state or contracting with the state. Executive Order 59 that came out October of last, or I think November of last year, apologize, works to improve diversity, equity, inclusion in state government. It actually requires state agencies to develop and implement equity and inclusion action plans, calls for creating mandatory equity inclusion training for all state employees, and also creates a diversity and equity advisory council, of which the lieutenant governor will chair on that one. And so again, leading by example, that, you know, we don't want to just sit here and say, oh, we should be diverse, and we should make sure that our hiring is equitable, and we really need to be making a concerted effort to make that happen. And so pushing the agencies to do this through executive order is how our administration has chosen to address this. Next slide. And we're really talking about energy here on this, on the clean energy economy and the opportunities in this space related to diversity and inclusion. And the office that I work now with and direct was created in an executive order last year to improve clean energy in Wisconsin and transition to a clean energy economy and generate thousands of family supporting jobs. And I don't know, I'm sure we have people across the US that are on this call, and if you haven't had a chance to look at it, there's a 2019 Clean Jobs Midwest report. There's actually a lot of, I'm not sure if it covers all the states, but I think it does. The environmental entrepreneurs put it together. And for the Midwest, it counts 76,000, just over 76,000 clean energy jobs. And that's, to put that in perspective, that's nearly enough to pack every seat in Lambeau Field. Now that's just Wisconsin. That's opportunity in Wisconsin right now. And every year the industry adds an additional 1,700 jobs and continues to grow. That will grow even more as technology changes, as research changes, as the way that we consume energy changes. And so there's a lot of opportunity here for clean energy jobs. And we want to make sure that everybody is afforded the opportunity, again, to be a part of that movement. And we actually need to modernize our electric grid as part of this clean energy movement. And only just a small portion, this 2.4% of the clean energy jobs are in advanced grid work. And so that number is expected to grow exponentially too. And so we want to try to find the opportunities, again, to get people involved in that effort. And then our Executive Order 52 is a creation of the Governor's Task Force on Climate Change. And there's definitely an equity and inclusion portion related to that, because we want to recognize that climate change is a threat to communities of color and low income. And we want to make sure all the voices are heard at the table. One of the things that our Lieutenant Governor says a lot when he's giving his talks is that if you're talking about homelessness, if you don't have a person who's experienced a homeless situation or homelessness in their life, then you don't have all the voices at the table. If you're talking about poverty and you don't have someone sitting at the table who's experienced poverty, then you don't have all the voices. And so diversifying this work is important. We have to get outside of our comfort zone at times, and we also have to get the right voices to the table to be able to talk about this. Next slide. And then the there's a national effort through the National Association of State Energy Officials there's an energy equity task force, and it's really to look at the energy and climate policies that are coming from the states and the programs that are coming from the states, and make sure that we're advancing and understanding income, racial, geographic, and other inequities and their impacts on our programs and the energy sector, and then develop processes and strategies to effectively engage communities on the front lines of economic and environmental injustice. And so it's really important for us as a nation and as National Association Energy Officials, Association of Energy Officials, to really work together to make a dent in this and make sure that we have a diverse and inclusive workforce. Next slide. And that's all I have. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much to everybody. Maria, fantastic. And I'm so good to see, all that's happening in Wisconsin. And I think you were right to point out the work of the National Association of State Energy Officers nationwide, really doing great work on trying to advance equity, not only in the workforce, but on the deployment of clean energy to neighborhoods and communities of color and low-income communities all over the nation. So thank you. We have quite a few questions, and we have 9 minutes to take them on. So let's get right to them. We have two related questions that are about the current COVID-19 emergency and the possibility, is there any possibility to turn that into some kind of an opportunity for expanding and diversifying the workforce for clean energy? So I'll read them exactly as they were written. The first one says, do you think the massive layoffs due to COVID-19 could actually be an opportunity for the clean energy sector to attract a wider range of people, especially among the hourly wage workers? And then a related question, what points can we push in diversity, equity, and inclusion in the clean energy industry during this time that will help us get around the, oh, but wait, we need our money for basic things? So basically, are there ways that we can take advantage of the current moment to help diversify and expand the workforce?
I could answer that. I don't know, Kevin, if you're going to call on each of us.
No, thanks, Tamika. Why don't you get started and then others can join in?
Yeah, sure. So I think from a Massachusetts perspective, I think that this is definitely an opportunity for us because there are some jobs that will just simply disappear because of the COVID-19. Some companies will just, not be able to come back. And then some companies will just say, okay, well, we learned that we can do less. We've been able to manage, and we've learned that we can do without less, with less employees. So I think this is a perfect opportunity for us, especially in Massachusetts, to go out there and make people aware of our industry. As I mentioned earlier, so building operations in Massachusetts, we have an infrastructure in Boston alone where the buildings are very old and a lot of them need to be retrofitted. And also, I think this for us is an opportunity for us to showcase that to the people that, have lost their jobs or are going to be on the unemployment line for who knows, how long, especially because in building operations, we are lacking with people that know how to use the technology. Once it's retrofitted, a lot of it is computer-based. It's not so much the old, the old big equipment that they use, the heating systems. And so for Massachusetts, this is going to be a way for us to really train people in the technology and get them over to building operations, because there's going to be a lot of jobs in Boston and well as Massachusetts in building operations, because our industry is already starving for that. So I believe this is an opportunity for Massachusetts.
Yeah, I agree. This is Andrea. Can I just jump in real quick?
Absolutely. Go for it, Andrea.
Great. Yeah, I think in terms of, is it an opportunity for hourly wage workers, folks who've lost their jobs? Absolutely. And this is what we've been saying for years in the solar industry. The solar industry has a lot of different career pathways, a lot of different types of jobs within the solar industry. And most of these jobs do not require specialized education or specialized training. Most do not require a bachelor's degree. or even a community college degree. So there's a very low education barrier to entry and usually better entry-level pay. So it is an opportunity. We've been saying this for years. Now you can stand head and shoulders above the competition by getting some specialized training, by getting a NABCEP associate certification, or taking some classes at a community college. But generally speaking, the solar industry is not looking for folks who have a PhD or even a master's degree. They're looking for ordinary, hardworking people with a willingness to learn, with an ability to do a little bit of technical or manual labor. And of course, as I believe it was Tamika said, there's a real push toward IT and computer and the digitization of the solar industry. So if anybody has any computer skills, everything's going online. There's a real push for some online and instantaneous permitting and all of that. And so more and more of that work will be coming digitized.
This is Kristen. I'd love to jump in too, just on that, but also on the DEI side of it as well. But just to follow on the opportunity side, I do think there's a big opportunity here in the way that they've already suggested. So I'm not going to rehash those pieces, but I do think it's important to also sort of keep our eye on some of the organizations that do offer some training and tools, the nonprofits that are out there that bring training to communities that might not have access to it otherwise. And my hope is that we can all keep a focused eye on them and make sure that they are getting the resources they need in times like this, when, if the bulk of their revenue previously came around, in-person training events and they can't hold those for the next few months, making sure that we are finding ways to support those spaces so that they continue to exist after the fact. Because I think the reality of the bulk of hourly wage workers that, at least at the moment, are losing their jobs is that there would be some level of retraining required. But as Andrea said, it's not a huge lift of training, but we want to make sure that those resources are out there so that we can transition folks into these roles quickly. I do think there will be a lot of opportunity to get it right. And I do think we as an industry have to seize the opportunity of it, because the reality of our ongoing world is that risks like this are going to continue to come up. Challenges like this are going to continue to be in front of us. And we need to make sure that we have a really diverse workforce to help us meet those challenges in new ways. And so that, to me, is a really critical piece of the opportunity not only for those workers, but for us as an industry to make sure we're getting it right. But I also wanted to address that second part of it, sort of in the context of COVID-19 and large world challenges. How do we still convince our companies, our teams, our organizations that diversity and equity is still an important thing to be working on and focused on? And I think for me, one, you have to address just kind of the open thing that, like, yes, this is a big root level survival question for so many of us. And so root survival, everybody's gonna have to do personally what they need to do. But I think it comes back to what I was saying at the end in terms of this being an opportunity for us as an industry, is the reality that in order to be the best business that we can be, in order to address risk, in order to address a crisis, we really need to have diverse teams at the table all the time as we make decisions. And so the more we can focus on diversifying our process, diversifying our teams then as a result, and building a culture that continues to demand that sort of diversity on an ongoing basis, to cultivate it, to value it, to endorse it, that in the long run is really the most valuable thing for our businesses, for our organizations, for our institutions. So it's a root sort of culture thing that has to be addressed. And we shouldn't be seeing it as a sort of tack on nice to have thing. I often say, especially in industries like ours where there tend to be a lot of startups or things like that, we see, what I call the startup blinders, where a company is really small and they're like, oh, I just have to get to revenue neutral, or I have to get to this revenue point before. And then when I get there, then I'll think about workforce, or then I'll think about HR, then I'll think about culture. But the reality is that you build culture from the first hire, right? From the very first decisions you make. You're building the culture of your company. And so that is sort of a root piece of all the work we do. And I think that's how you have to start addressing it as a company. And that is a critical piece of your ongoing way of addressing a crisis like this moment in time. So that would be my 2 cents on addressing it that way. And I
And
realize
I cannot imagine a better way to end our time together than with those remarks. Thank you, Kristen. They're almost perfect for summarizing some of the key things in front of us. I want to let people who put forward questions know that we will share those questions with all of the speakers, and they can, get back in touch with you. We just had a couple that we were not able to get to. Also let you know that this will be posted both in terms of the slides and also in terms of the recording on the website at the Center for Business and the Environment at Yale, CBAE. And we'll have everything there, as well as many other great resources for those of you who are interested in what we're doing here at the Yale School of Forestry and the Yale School of Management. So thank you so much for joining us. It was a great hour, and thanks to all of our panelists and to the team at CBAE. We look forward to talking to all of you again. Lots of other great webinars being put forward by the school and by CBAE. Please join us and stay healthy and safe. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kevin.
Bye, thanks.